Okay, good morning, Hemshech Chaim Beis, Volume 2, page 1193, we reached. The Rebbe Rashab is explaining the story with Eliyahu Hanavi, where the expression is used that he healed the broken altar that was defiled. The word Vayirape, he healed it. Just a moment. Okay. And as a result of that, the Jews said, Hashem hu Elokim twice. So he's explaining that in the context of the pasuk V'yadaita Ayin b'shavesa levavecha ki Hashem hu Elokim b'shamayim mimal v'al ha'oretz mitochas. That the two Havaya Elokim is the unity of the divine in existence. That even in the lowest levels, we come to discover through our effort, through our avodah, that Havaya really is hu Elokim, by transforming and reversing, transforming the tzimtzum on both dimensions. In the finite light, the finite energy, revealing the finite energy within existence, and revealing the infinite energy that's beyond existence, the infinite. So in doing so, he began to explain what is Mizbeach. Mizbeach is Malchus. The fire, the flame on the Mizbeach is the passion and the rotzeh and the yearning of Malchus from below to reach upward. And that is Eish Hashem and Eish Yud, that Eish Hey is reaching to Eish Yud, which is the dark flame is reaching to the white flame, basically. To explain that, he said, he began to go back to the topic of Tzimtzum and Oir, basically to explain what dark flame means, what's below. That in existence, first it begins with dark and then revelation. Because if it began with revelation, we wouldn't be able to tolerate and absorb the light. It would be too intense. So it begins with a tzimtzum. So tzimtzum is Vayhi Erev and then Vayhi Beker. So you start with the tzimtzum and then from there you move to Gili, to Eir. He also mentioned that this is Eita Er Kesalma, which we're going to review. I would review it later to understand it, because he's bringing that also the Eir serves like a salma, like a shirt, like a garment, explaining the difference between the garment of Oir and the garment of the Tzimtzum. But we'll get back to that, what that means exactly. Does he mean the Oir HaGvul? Does he mean the Oir HaKav? What Oir exactly is he talking about in that context? But regardless, there's no question that first you need concealment before you have revelation. The goal is to reach to Oir, but you have to begin with Choshech, which is going to explain the Eish Hashem, Eish Hey, and then the Eish Yud in Avodah, which we'll get back to at the end of this subject, back to Eliyahu Hanavi. But there's going to be a while till we get there. Meanwhile, he's reconnecting that which we've discussed about Tzimtzum and Gili. So, okay. So he says, Va'inyan hu, and I'm just summing up what we learned yesterday. The inyan of this is, like we see in all Nivraim, and everything in existence, you see there's two dimensions, a body and a soul. Or you would call the guf shel hanivra, the body of the creation, and the er v'shefa, and the energy and the flow, the divine flow that enters within it. That enters within it and that energizes it, like a keli and an oir. He said the same thing is in Ruchnius, the Nevraim El Yenim, like Efanim. Okay, the Efanim, you have the Efanim, and you have V'ruach HaChaya, but Efanim. The Efanim are a certain form of angels and celestial and spiritual creatures, and they have the Ruach Chaya, the living spirit within them. Same thing, Daimim, Tzemeach, and so on. Now, the body compared to the soul, this dimension, that the body compared to the energy within it is choshech. So the soul is compared to a flame, Neir Hashem, light, and the body is choshech, and they're opposites. Just like there's opposites between gashmis, physicality, and spirituality, and the spiritual. Another point is that the energy, that the body is not created by the energy. The energy energizes it. And the case of spiritual reality is the energy actually brings it into being. In the physical, the soul does not create the body. But even in the spiritual, where the energy brings the body into being, meaning brings the keli into being, it's also not the root of the keli. The keli has its own source. So it's unlike sunlight and the sun. It's unlike light and its source, because there the light does not come from another place. It's coming strictly from and exclusively from the source. When it comes to Eris and Kalim, or in this case, body and soul, these two dimensions he's talking about, the physical part, well, not just the physical, the container component, the dimension, the receptacle has its own source, which actually is coming from the state of concealment, not from the state of revelation. That's what he says. And bottle. Light and reflection is similar to the source, to the luminary, and it's nullified and it's completely sublimated in it, compared to it. The guf einem neshama, and it's not in a state like just like Gashmias, the physical is not similar to the spiritual. Even if they have parallels, but they're not similar, they're very separate entities. One's a yesh that has its own identity, and one is a spiritual part of it. And even furthermore, he said, not only are they not similar, it also conceals, which is the opposite of the bitl of the Ur to the Moir. So it's not just that it's not the same entity, it's also a concealer, so it's antithetical to it. And the reason for that is because it doesn't originate there. Light can never be a contradiction to the source of light because it originates from it. It's like an extension of it, a reflection of it. When it comes to this case, where we're talking about the words, I just want to use the right words. The guf, the body of something, whether it's a physical body or a spiritual body, or the container, is the shlafisha shedish shavuse ena megili elyon. It's not rooted from revelation, even if it travels through Ur, and Ur brings it into being, but it's rooted, adarabah, contrary from chashecha, from dark, from concealment, from the concealment of the energy. That's what allows the container to be a container. That's what makes the guf not the neshama. If it came from the neshama, it would just be a diminished form of spiritual energy. But we know it's not a diminished form of spiritual energy. It's actually a receiver, a container that is a separate entity that actually conceals. So that means it's rooted in a place. So for it to come into being, you needed the oyer, the energy to recede and be concealed. That allows, in the words that he says here, the cheshech to emerge, which is an existing entity that's based on the concealment of the energy. Which it says, I'm continuing to read, I'll just continue inside now. It's on top of, around 10 lines down from the top of page 1193. The line begins, Bechinas istalkus ha'er. V'hainu, shegam b'savuse, b'bechinas ha'er. Which means, also it's creation from the level of er. In other words, even though the keli is being created through the er, which in a way is also with the physical body. Remember, the physical body is not rooted in the soul, but its growth and its development of the fetus is because there's a soul in there that's causing it to grow. So essentially, the energy is like in a sense, I don't want to use the word watering. It's not like watering the earth because it's more than that. But if you take away the energy, the keli, the guf will not be viable. In Ruchnis, it's even more so, because the Eir, as he said in the parentheses, at the Mahaves Kulam, that the Eir actually brings it into being. But it's really activating those seeds that were planted through the Tzimtzum and the Rishimu that are the seeds and the root of containers. The energy now is what's bringing it alive and bring it into being. So he says, even the Tzisavusim B'chinas Eir, Ima Yeshe Bizgalas Tzisavusim Min Eir. So even though the revealed state of its coming into being is through the Eir, Hinei Sheidash Tzisavusim B'chinas HaCheshach. The root of the containers, the root of these bodies. I'm just looking at the word he uses here. Yeah, it's from the darkness, from the tzimtzum. Okay, from the concealment and the reshimu, which is the trace, the impression. That's what creates the seeds, the roots of the root of the containers. The kav comes, travels through that, brings it alive, and it comes into our reality. And the kalim begin to grow and develop level by level. Akudim, 10 energies in one container. The kudim, 10 energies and 10 intense energies in 10 small fragile containers. And then finally in Atzilus, 10 energies that are completely compatible and synthesized with the 10 containers. And then it continues in Biyah. So there's two things happening. There's two tracks at work. The Eir is the activating force, but the Eir is activating the Kalim. It would be just like the hand of the paintbrush, driven by the hand of the artist, but it needs paint to bring it alive. You can't just have a ray of light coming from the artist. You need to also have the bringing alive the roots and the seeds, as I put it, of these containers. So what we have here is that the Keli and the Eir have two different roots, even when the Eir is the one that's bring it into revelation, bring it into reality. So therefore, bottom line is that that the first thing you need is darkness. You need something to conceal, to limit the flow in order for reality to emerge. And that's the goof of everything that the Rebbe Rashab has been elaborating about. So we continue here. The Hainu, b'bchinas silica Eir dafka, which means specifically from the silica Eir, not from the revelation of the light, but from the removal or the concealment of the light that creates the goof, the body or the container or the structure or whatever you want to call the receptacle, as we discussed. Silica Eir dafka. Valkain, and therefore gam b'savuse min ha'eir. And therefore, if it was like sunlight from the sun and the creation of all structure would just simply be coming from light, then it would just be like the light, just a diminished state. And that's why since it has its own unique root and it's not coming from the light. So even when it's that the light is bringing it into being, its personality and its identity is not created in a way that it's similar to the Eir, but rather it becomes something that's separate from the Eir. So even though it unites with the energy, and we're going to discuss that shortly, but bottom line is you have something that's, you can call it an Eir and a Keli. You don't just say it's light and diminished light. It's not like sunlight that's coming down to earth and gets diminished. You could even put up a curtain, you could put up shades, but it's still light. Here we're talking about there's another identity. Even the very shade is an identity. That there's another identity where the existence is getting its body from. When I say body, I mean not just physical body, it's getting its form and body from. And that is the tzimtzum and the reshimu, the concealment. And that's why when it emerges, it doesn't emerge like light. It emerges as a keli. And I explained already the difference between Eir and Keli above. Doesn't mean like a cup, but it means like a receptacle, like a defined identity. It's created in a way that's separate from the Eir. In a state of substance, there's substance now. Chochma Bina, the substance of Klei HaChochma, Klei HaBina, U'b'chinas Hester ala Irva Achayis. He says two things. That first, it's a substance, and at the same time, it's a substance that also, in a state of concealment, covers up on the light and on the energy within it. And the best example is the human body. As much as we are one with the soul, and we're alive because the soul and body join, but there's two separate forces at work here. Because the body has its own root. So even though the soul brings it to life, and it was the development of the fetus and development of the child that came through the neshama, together with the neshama, and yet they're two separate entities, and one indeed conceals, and the body actually conceals, until we become aware of our neshama, when we reveal it through our avodah and our work. Okay, this is where we stopped yesterday. So now that's a guf and neshama. Now he's going to go back to Eris and Kalim Lamaila. But before I continue, I want to just add one key point that is going to be very relevant here. Yesterday, I gave a long introduction, if you recall, about Eris and Kalim and about the fact that there's different levels of concealments. When we say something is a garment, it can be a garment that's a separate entity like a jacket, a coat. It could be a garment that's part of the entity. If you remember, B'nei Ubei, Kedain, High Kamsas, Levushim B'nei Ubei, like that, we said turtle or snail, or there was I forgot the other creatures, where their shell is part of their reality. So in other words, you can have a garment that's attached, you can have a garment that's detached, but it's still a garment, and even the attached garment is still a garment. And if you go through the whole Ishtalshlus, the whole cosmic order, everything compared to a higher level is a form of a garment in a way. This is very vital because we're going to be discussing now in more specific, when we talk Eris and Kalim, even though we do discuss two entities, but there's very different the Eris and Kalim in Atzilus than the Eris and Kalim in Biyah. Like in this world, the energy, the divine energy within existence is very concealed. 8 billion people on this planet are usually not aware of the energy within their lives. Meaning, you eat a piece of food, you walk in the street. How many people are cognizant that everything is really divine energy that's within existence? That's why we call it a klippa. A klippa is a husk, a shell, and we focus on the shell, not on the fruit within it. Or in the language that we've been speaking, we focus on the body and not the spark within it. That's why I say, Lo alechem levade, ki lo alechem levade, ala lechem levade yichya adam. Not on bread alone does man live, but on the Meitzei Pi Hashem, the divine spark within it. So this world, the Eris and Kalim are very much concealing the Eris within it, and it's our work to change and reverse the process and transform the tzimtzum, which we're discussing here. In Atzilus, Kalim don't have that issue. Kalim are not concealers. They're concealers as far as concealing the divine intensity of the Eir. And they focus on the structure, but the structure is a divine structure. So it's important to remember that even though we just elaborated how the Kalim are rooted in Cheshech, Cheshech has many meanings. Cheshech doesn't always mean negative in the sense, like we say, Cheshech kafle mechupel. In Tanya chapter 36, when he speaks about how the energy of the divine gets concealed. Tachtenim, he says, what means tachtenim? The lowest levels, not lowest in space, but lowest in revelation. That the energy continues to get concealed and concealed. Even in Ak, it's already concealed. Tzimtzum Arishan concealed the infinite divine light, the pure divine consciousness that dominates everything, that encompasses everything. So everything is based on a tzimtzum. But there's a very big difference of how the tzimtzum impacts Ak and Akudim and Atzilus than how it impacts this physical world. In this world, the Eir has gone through many diminishments to the point that the structure of existence we don't call Kodesh. This world is not a holy world. It's a mundane world, Chayil. Our job is to turn Chayil into Kodesh. But that's not the case. Let's say on Shabbos, we spoke that it's higher than Berurim. In our world, it's that way. So everything he discussed about that it's rooted in the Tzimtzum, it can be rooted in the Tzimtzum simply by the fact that the Tzimtzum concealed the intensity or the complete infinite energy and directed and guided, like the second effect of the Tzimtzum, the finite energy. But that's the effect of the Tzimtzum. The Tzimtzum in the lowest worlds, its effect is a lot deeper. Atzilus cannot defy God. The Alter Rebbe says tachtenim means to the point it gets so dark, the light gets so concealed, to the point that it becomes, we say, aniva afsi, a mole klippes v'sitra achra, a world filled with husks and the opposite, the negative energy, the opposite of holiness, to the point it says, aniva afsi aid, I and nothing else. That literally defies God. Not just is a concealment compared to the infinity of God. Not just concealment in the sense directing the finite energy. That's all within godliness. That's all still a godly reality. Even all the way to Atzilus. We're talking a darkness that can become what we call darkness, the fullest darkness of Golus. So when Adam and Chava were in Gan Eden, before they ate from the tree of knowledge, there was already a tzimtzum, but it didn't become that dark. Like we learned in Basa the Gani from the Medrash and Shir Hashirim Rabbah. The first sin concealed the divine, went from the earth to the first heaven, the next second heaven, the third heaven. Every generation of sins concealed more and more of the divine. So in concealment, there are many levels. So though we've discussed it in general terms, that everything begins with concealment and then revelation, we need to qualify now, and he's going to qualify, that is a very big difference between higher levels and lower levels in the effect of this tzimtzum. Okay, so this is what he says now. The kachul lamaila, just like we just explained that it is in the nevroim gashmim, in the physical creations, and in the spiritual creations, like the efanim, those angels that have the body and they have the ruach chaya, the divine spirit, the living, the ruach chaya, and the spirit of life within them. He says the same thing as lamaila, the b'chinas eres v'kelim, in the energies and the containers, meaning throughout his talshus. She'eru b'chinas gili erein sabaruchu. Oyer, as its name suggests, its name clearly states, is a revelation of the divine infinite light. Here, Erein Sof doesn't necessarily mean infinite versus finite. It just means Erein Sof, that it's a gili of godliness. V'hu moker v'shedish chaya neshamis, and that Oyer is the root and source, the source and root, I should say, of chaya haneshamis, the life of souls. So the souls originate in Oyer. Like we said, Ner Hashem nishmas Adam. The soul of a person is the flame of God, so that's Oyer. Ach b'chinas hakelim. However, the level of containers, zeu hamastir ala er. That its role is to conceal or to confine and to cover up on the Oyer, the ziv, and on the Oyer, the light and the ziv and reflection. Umezeh sheidish yisavas haguf. And from the kelim is the root of the creation of the body. Interesting, he doesn't say mocker here, he only says root. I think the reason is obvious. A mocker is closer. When you say mocker, it's like a closer source. Shadish is more the root, it's more of a distant source and close source. But the root of the body. Now you could ask the question, 1 minute, didn't we learn that the body, the yesh, is rooted in atzmus? That ein le'il v'siba acheres. Only God can create yesh ma'ayin. But however, God, remember, uses Eris and Kalim to manifest his divine energy. So everything is rooted in Etzem, in Atzmus. But the Neshamis are expressed through the Oyer Eliki, and the Guf comes through the Kalim, which creates structure. So on higher levels, it's not yet a body, definitely not a physical body, not even a spiritual body. It's still simply a defined energy, or a Koyach HaGvul, the power of the finite, working together with the power of the finite, and the Oyer is reflective of the divine energy. But as I explained, there's Eir HaBligvul, which we'll get back to soon. That reflects the divine infinitude, the divine expansiveness that doesn't have any confines and limits. The Eir HaGvul is the divine energy. Yes, it's divine. It's Oyer, not Keli. And that is the divine energy that will enter the Keli. And then there is the Kelim themselves rooted in the Tzimtzum and the Rishim and the Koyach HaGvul, the power to create a finite structure, which is energized by the divine energy in that structure. And it makes sense because we want to have the interface that they all connect with each other. So the finite energy emerges from the infinite energy. From the finite energy, it will ultimately create the finite structure, but you need to have the Koyach HaGvul that element, the seeds that we talked about, that bring it to life. Now, in the terms of what he said now, so the Oyer is the root of souls, and the Keli is a root for, Keli meaning that Tzimtzum and Helam that creates the Kelim is the root for the body. Now, when we say it conceals, as I mentioned before, conceal means many different things. Conceal can simply say it conceals the clay of Chachma conceals Bina from Chachma. That's also concealment. But it doesn't mean total concealment like we have in this world where it's a total galus, choshech, kafel, mechupel, even a double concealment, as we're going to discuss briefly. Okay, in shortly here.
I think that
that's the root of
higher
the
than Shelesh. I think Shelesh is having already a chizo the Gashmius, and Moker is higher.
No, that's incorrect. That I can tell you clearly. In my modern, it does talks the opposite. Shadish is a root which is usually considered to be more distant, and a moker is something that's closer. That's in general how Chassidus talks about it. It's like there's an expression, ilas ha-ilas, sibas ha-sibas. Ila v'siba is similar. Ila is a cause and siba is a cause. But a ila is more of like a moker, and siba is more like a shadish. That's in many my modern. There may be some exceptions, but my recollection, that's usually how it's explained. Did you see it somewhere, or you're talking about your own understanding of?
No, you're saying that Chassidus. I thought so.
I recall that's how it is. I have to look inside, obviously, but that's my correct recollection. Okay, good. So now we explained how Eir and Keli are the root for Neshama and Guf. But what about what's the root for Eir and Keli? He says, and so the Eir comes from the Moir, right? The source. Here he uses Moker, not Shadish. The source for the creation of the containers, why they had Simtsum, is through the concealment, Vistalkus Eir, and the receding or the removal of the energy, Shenichlal b'Moir, how the energy recedes back into the source. So to put it in that language of, let's use the language of a teacher and a student. The student is not created by the teacher. The mind of the student is not created by the teacher. The mind of the student is like the Keli. It's its own entity. The teacher needs to conceal his intensity and all his expansive ideas and knowledge, Tzimtzum, in order to be able to be mashpia to the Talmud. So in that sense, in context of what he's saying here, the Kelim are rooted by concealment, not by revelation. That's the bottom line. So when he says the Eid is Nichel b'Moed, it means the Eid doesn't disappear. It just goes back into the teacher. It recedes back into him. He's not revealing it. He's not expressing it. So it remains in his mind. That's what he's saying here. Okay. Now, before I continue, anybody have any questions? Because he's going to, again, this is quite dense. I'm using a lot of material that we've learned previously in Ayin Beis to explain it some more. And he's going to now get even more, going to be more details that again are depending on knowing what was learned until now. So before I go, I want to go slowly enough that we could all absorb this. So if there's any questions on so far what we've said, I'll be happy to answer. Okay.
We're still explaining the difference between the neshama and the relationship neshama and guf and the relationship of gashmius and ruchnius in the world. I'd say the world and Hashem versus neshama
he said
and guf.
Everything in existence has body and soul. We're in the middle of that discussion, yeah.
So yeah, so this is the
actually
difference.
The real headline is not about neshama and guf. The real headline here is cheshech and oir. That you begin with dark and then you go to light. That's where the thing all began. Just go back to the previous page where he said to explain Eish Hey and Eish Yud. He started to say Bir Inyan Eish Hey Eish Yud. Because he's explaining the dark light and the white light. That's where it's going, which is really explaining Mizbeach about the story of Eliyahu. So not sure how far you want to go back. It's all part of a flow explaining Havayu Elikim. At the end of the day, it's really about Havayu Elikim.
Yeah, so on the top of the page, the brackets, in the parentheses, it says.
And everybody's silent because I can't hear you. There's a background.
It might be from me.
Oh,
Can you hear me now?
it's hard to hear because this.
All right, no, maybe a little bit later.
Okay, go ahead. Oh, okay.
Can you hear me? Is it still?
Go ahead.
So we say there's a difference between the way the Ereleki is mechaya the world, and the way the neshama is mechaya the guf.
He's not discussing that here.
So that was just in the parenthesis.
No, it's the whole piece, the whole thing. He's talking about both. He's talking about the relationship that everything has a soul and a body. That's like Eir and Keli, like you said clearly. That's like an Eir and Keli. That's the main focus here. He's not coming to analyze the difference between Eir and Keli and Neshama and Guf. He's just speaking about it in general context. He spoke Lamata, he spoke in Ruchnius, and now he's going to Lamaila and Eiris and Kalim. Okay. Now, Vihine, Hakelim Hemchinis Asius. Now, you may recall we learned this at length in a number of places. The Kalim sometimes are referred to, here he's just saying it as a statement, but sometimes the Kalim are referred to letters, Oisius. So just to begin, a simple example that I always give, when you look at a page right now, look at any mimer here, page. There are letters on the page that make up words and sentences and phrases, and there's the message that these letters are conveying. So a good way to understand Kalim is seeing it as a container, or you could say the channels, how that channel the energy into letters that we could understand. If the Rebbe Rashab did not write down the words that we're learning right now, how would the idea get to us? It would have been in his mind and remained there. So Oisius are carriers. Osa Baker is an expression. It brings the light. It brings the dawn. So it's a carrier. It's channels. An example we've used in the past has been use a projector of white light on a screen, which is just plain white light. It's shapeless, seamless. You put a film, and then suddenly you see images. Let's say the film is made up of letters, Aleph, Beis, Gimel, or Beis, Reish, Vav, Chaf. So now you see Beis, Reish, Vav, Chaf made up of white light. So the letters, the film, which is a separate entity, has now given shape to the light. It's still light, but it's shining through the letters. So the Kalim are referred to at times, and here he's saying it clearly, at the Oisius. Now, Oisius, do they conceal or do they reveal? So it depends what you're talking about. Compared to the infinite light, so to speak, the light that's unbound by letters, it's a concealer. It's limiting it that it should only be a light that takes on a particular shape. But on the other hand, from the point of view of the recipient, it's a revealer because we wouldn't know the ideas if they were not written down in letters and expressed in letters and words. So now he's going to develop this point. Again, something discussed at length earlier. I can even point out to you if you want to see exactly where it is, but it's not relevant right now because I think we can get through this. So he says, you may remember these are also the Aces when the Eibishter said, "Bereshis bara lekimas hashemayim v'saaretz." Nami maimerhu. It's also a statement. And then he said, "Yehi oyer and yehi rakia." The 10 asarim ma'moris nivre'elim. Ma'moris are expressions. They're words. Why did the Eibishter need words? He couldn't just think and say, "I want oyer, I want rakia," but he wanted it to be in a way that it should be tangible and we should be able to relate to it. Going back to the central theme that God chose to manifest the Oir into Eisius. The Eisius of the Chav Beis Eisius HaTeira, 22 Hebrew letters, which are the basis of the Sodom Amoris, and in all their tzirufim, their permutations and combinations and gematrias and so on, like the Alter Rebbe explains in Shaykh V'Amunah, everything is created through these letters. So the letters are channels of divine energy. That's why we spoke about Sodom Amoris Nivra Elam. So those Asis are what he calls Kalim, the Koyach HaGvul, through which will radiate the Eir HaGvul, which comes from ultimately the Eir HaBligvul, as we've been discussing. So now he says like this. Okay, they're Asis. Now in Asis itself, there's different stages or different levels. The Yesh, b'zeh gamkein hefresh ben b'chinas Kalim de Zoh, the Kalim de Malchus. There's a difference between the Kalim of Zoh and the Kalim of Malchus. So if we go back to the Maimer, he's going to refer to it, Maimer Bereshis. So if you look at this Maimer, just pointing to a page, just to refresh your memory, where he spoke about Malchus and Zoh, and actually higher than Zoh as well. So this was discussed in, let's see, just a few pages back. I'm just looking where it was. I think it was, one second. He was talking about the Asis Malbishim, page 1177, but I think primarily on 1178, if I recall correctly. Hold on. Yeah. Talked about the difference between thought and speech. So I just wanted to refer to it in a minute. Yeah. On page 1178. So he spoke about different ways letters relate to the energy that's within the letters. But if I recall, did he speak about Malchus and Zoh? Well, he did. I just don't find it right now. Oh, yeah. He talks about it there at the top of page 1179. Der Haifish ben Kalim de Zoh le Kalim de Malchus. Okay. So now he's going to discuss in Kalim itself. As we explained, Kalim and Neir are two separate entities, but they're different levels of containers. So he says like this, that there's a difference between the containers of Zoh, that's of the Midas of Atzilus. Zohar Ampin is the small face of Chesed through Yesod, and the containers of Malchus, which Malchus is already preparing the energy and the force to go into the next world, Biyah. So there's a difference between those Kalim. You may recall, Elikim and Adnai are Malchus. Elikim is how Malchus is in Atzilus, and Adnai is how Malchus enters into Biyah, as he said at the top of page 1177. Okay, so now he says like this, that there's a difference between these two containers. The Kalim de Zoh, the Kalim of Midas, Hein al derech moshel esis hamachshava. They're like, for example, the letters of thought. So when we think, we also think with letters, but the letters are far more sublime and less tangible, to the point you don't always feel that you're even thinking in letters, because the main force there is the energy, the oir. So that's like the esis hamachshava. Shein esis ruchnim, they're sublime, they're ethereal letters. They're not tangible, let's say, like the letters of speech or written letters. Shein esis ruchnim adayin, they're still in an ethereal state, letters. Uboim b'derech mamela ma'anefesh umiyuchodim boy. And they come automatically. You don't need to make much effort. As soon as a person is thinking, automatically letters emerge because the thoughts manifest in some form of expression. Letters are the parameters of your thought. And they're attached to the nefesh. Because it's all within, it's not the nefesh itself. Obviously, the soul is higher even than faculties, let alone garments, thought. But it's connected to, machshava is not going outside of the person. It's thought, the soul, as it manifests in intelligence, which manifests in the garment called machshava, it's called, machshava is memela, it's automatic, it's natural and automatic, and it is miyuchad, it is it's connected with its source. Okay. The page I just referred to, top of page 1179. Yeah. So like machshava, now he's going to go back to the nimshal, the moral. So thought, the letters of speech, the letters of thought are still ethereal. They are memela and they are miyuchad. So all three expressions. They're still ruchniim. They are automatic, meaning doesn't need an extra measure of effort. The letters come with the oir. As soon as a person starts thinking, the letters immediately emerge from there. And they are miyuchad. The same thing, the containers of Zah. And to make it more palatable, think of Zah as emotions. So Malchus is already not about your feelings, it's about creating something. It's about being a king leading his people. It's not about the king in his own emotional state. But your emotions, which connect to you, are like kelim of machshava, of esis and machshava. Heim be'erech b'chinas ha'er. The kelim are be'erech, commensurate to the oir. They're closer, like we just said, machshava is closer to the soul. U'miyichodim im oir. And they're united with it. He doesn't say the word memela here because it's not really the key point. The key point is to say that the keli and are working very symbiotically together in a very connected way. And even though they're the state of containers, we said before, it's more of the channels. It's not the oir itself. It's a keli to the oir. Hamaylimim. The kelim, and we said, I should have read that together. And even though they are concealing containers, we said before, the keli is a concealer. And it's rooted in concealment of the oir for the keli to emerge. The chenu in the parentheses, the chenu b'chlolis, the kol b'chinas hakelim and b'chinas helam. Because that's how it is in general, that all levels of containers, all levels of the containers are a state of concealment. As was discussed earlier at length, again, he's referring to earlier. So in the Inyan, this is the expression from the Torah of the Magid that we began learning over 300, more than 400 pages ago. So let me refer you to where he's talking to. So the Magid uses the Lashon that in order to create chatzetzes, two half of images, and unite them, you need to make kamet simtsumim, derech kama elemis. Let me just show you the exact Lashon where that is. And see how far back that goes. Okay. Wow. You can't imagine how far back that is. Very, very far back. It is, let's see. Even more. Yeah. Page 832. We are now on 1193. So we're talking about over 300 and around 60 pages ago. So you look at page 832. Look at the beginning of the paragraph. He says, HaKadosh Baruch Hu also kamet simtsumim. And that began a long discussion about simtsumim, which has gone for hundreds of pages, literally. The Maimorim of Pesach, Amorim of Shavuos. That's already back at Parsha Boy, Ayin Hey. That's where it began, also Kamet Tzimtzumim. But the Rebbe Rashab has referred to that line, at least in my memory, 5-6 times directly, and in some cases elaborated at length what they are. So what did we learn there? That the whole point of the Tzimtzumim is to create an energy that can be contained, and hence the word containers. So containers, by definition, are meant to be to contain and limit the light, or in other words, to conceal the light to some extent. The question is to what extent? As I mentioned, you could have containers that are just very, very transparent and just the minimal concealment. You could have containers that are total concealers, like we have in this world, in this physical world. So it's all the question of where nishtalshlus you are. So he's saying in this parentheses, and the general kelim are helam. So then why did you just say that in Zoh, the kelim of Zoh are like the letters of thought, which are connected with and united with, and are sublime and united with the soul, in this case with the Oir, Makol Mokem, nevertheless, even though they are kelim alimim, to some extent they are containers that conceal or contain, nevertheless, Makol Mokem Hariyem Megalim Ese'er. So yes, they are concealers, but they also reveal the Oir. They're like the colors in light. This takes us back to page 1179 on top that I just pointed out. So he explained there that you could have light. There's white light. We know you put light through a prism, or like we see a rainbow, where the water droplets after a rain or the mist creates a rainbow. What is the rainbow exactly? Is it light or is it containers? So on one hand, it's made out of light, but the colors of light are giving it definition. So you see a container can be called a container even though it's still revealing, but it's revealing not the white, shapeless and colorless light. It's the light that's already being bent and turned into blue or red and the different colors of the rainbow or the different colors of a prism. So you see here an example in the physical world where you could have something that is colorless, but if you do the right thing, that colorless light, we're not talking about painting, tinting tinted glasses or tinted containers. We're talking about that in the light itself, the light now emerges as in a particular color. So it's a mashal, an example for kelim on the higher levels, that though they are concealers, why is it concealing? Because at the end of the day, it is shaping the light into a particular color. So there is an element of concealment of the whiteness, of the shapeless, of the colorlessness of the light. So he calls that containers, and he compares it to the colors of light, Gvani Ha'er. And another example he gave on page top of 1179, as well as earlier in Ayin Beis, is the color of, well, it's not another example, the color of light, and he continues. Like, for example, like the look and color of an apple. The color of an apple is commensurate with the form of energy and taste of that apple. Some places in Chassidus it speaks about yellow apples being sweet and red ones being more bitter. So the color, on one hand, you can't call it complete concealer. It's a revealer, but it's a revealing of it's a revealer. I should say the other way around. On one hand, it's a color, which is already a form of a container. On the other hand, it's a container that reflects the light that's shining through it. That's what he says here. On top of page 1179, he said these words. The color is not a separate personality from the very energy. Like the color of an apple, that according to the taste, whether it's sweet or more bitter, according to that will be the color. And it comes automatically from the energy force or the personality of the particular apple. That's Kalim of Zah. Okay. I'm going to stop here. He's not going to go to the Kalim of Malchus and explain. They're also containers, but they're compared more to speech. The letters of speech, which are more separate from. It's still coming from the Ayr, from the light of the individual who's speaking, but it's now taken on some type of shape and form that's more separate than the Ayr itself. And the proof is that you can take away those letters and words, a recipient, a listener can listen to them and take them with him. So they're going to be more separate and they're going to be more tangible. So it's going to be a different type of keli in this context of, again, that everything is coming from the chesh, from concealment. So it's a question of the level of concealment. So I'll stop here. Does anybody want to ask anything? No? Okay. So we're stopping here around 2/3 down.